Good evening, everyone. It is September 8th, 6:30. We'll call this meeting to order. We are here at the Oregon School District Innovation Center. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak, Dr. Bush, Ms. Garrison, Mr. Hensel, Dr. Lakuta, Ms. Wright, Mr. Pankratz.
Present. The board has a quorum, and Anna will be here any minute now. She's just running a proof of notice. I have the proof of notice. Thanks, Katie, for that. And we'll take an approval of the agenda for tonight. We have our typical consent calendar, our normal information items. We have 3 action items, 2 policies, one on monetary donations, sponsorship, and naming rights, and also the policy 616 on naming of facilities and land. And then we will also look at our 25-26 preliminary budget. And then we have a pretty lengthy list of information items tonight as well, with the opening of school being this week. So with that, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as printed. Motion by Heather. Is there a second? Second by Nathan. Let's do a roll call, Katie.
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Hensel, Dr. Bush,
Yes.
Ms. Wright, Mr. Pankratz.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. We have an agenda. All right, next up is the consent calendar. Do any board members have any items they would like to remove from the consent calendar tonight? If none, I'll take a motion to approve to get this on the floor. Motion by Heather. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Bush. And let's see here. I would like to read our donations. So we have a $490 donation from Oregon Cares for transportation and tickets for community education movie. We have a $215 plus school supplies donation from Ticey Printing for children in need. A $1,250 donation from the Oregon Rotary for the Rotary Scholarship. And then a donation of special education equipment from Nicole Becks. That's a Stander and Hoyer lift for the special ed department. So as always, we are very gracious of our community donations for our school district. Is there any other discussion on the consent calendar tonight? All right, Katie, please call the roll.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Hensel?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. All right, we'll move right into B1, information items. Superintendent's report on student highlights. Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. For the student highlights tonight, we will be saying thank you to the students who helped us prepare for the start of school. So this group of students served as a panel during our new educator orientation week. So we really loved their insights and their advice for new staff, especially the tips on their favorite lunch foods. And the panel was certainly one of the highlights of the week. So we're really grateful to the students that they were able to join us, and they were such an enthusiastic welcome to new staff in the OSD. It takes a lot of courage for students to stand up in front of adults and speak so beautifully. And that is certainly what the students did, not only in the new educator panel, but also the students who joined us in the gym at the back to school assembly in front of 700 people. These students were able to take the microphone and share a little bit about their OSD experience. I think that's really, really remarkable. They prepared their remarks in advance, and they were really pretty awesome. So many thanks to Mackenzie, Gavin, Jackie, and Olivia for not only sharing really wise words, but also for just being willing to do something that for many people would be very, very difficult.
All right, thank you. Next we have public comment. Katie, is anyone registered? No one registered. Is anyone in the audience would like to make a public comment? Anyone for public comment? Third time, anyone for public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. OEA report, and I don't see anyone from the OEA here this evening. Student report, no student yet. Maybe next time. Which brings us to our action items. We will start with C1, Policy 813, Monetary Donations, Sponsorship, and Naming Rights. I believe this is coming from policy, correct?
It is, so I think Gina will be our
Okay.
point person.
Gina, take it away.
Thank you. I will look to the fellow policy committee members to add anything that I missed. So this is a new board policy that is recommended from the policy committee, policy 813, on monetary donations, sponsorships, and naming rights. The policy committee spent a number of meetings talking about this, and the direction they are recommending is that policy 616 be deleted and that we roll the naming rights into this policy so it's all in one place for convenience. It also is followed by policy 814, which is student fundraising. So it felt like the best place for this policy to be. In terms of the policy itself, it's really divided into 3 different types of fundraising. One, you'll see in 813.02 definitions, is a donation, which is a voluntary monetary contribution, versus a sponsorship, which is providing financial support for a period of time, such as sponsoring an athletic event or advertisements on social media. And then we have naming rights, which would be attaching a name to a district facility. So something like Zach Field, should that be on our property. And so the committee felt it was important to have those 3 different categories of sponsorship and donation for the district, and then talking about the parameters of what those donations, sponsorships, or naming rights may look like. They also recommend that in 813.05, that naming a school would be different than naming rights of facilities. So you'll see different criteria there when naming a school versus other facilities, and that would really live with the Board of Education. And then you'll see in 813.06, in terms of approval, that if you want to solicit naming rights on behalf of the district, that it has to be with permission from the board in advance. And otherwise, all naming rights would go to the board for approval. And then should the board adopt this policy, then the administration would write and implement administrative guidelines that are consistent with the policy, that are more operational and procedural in nature. So with that, I will look to see if my committee members would like to add anything, or happy to take questions.
Gina, before we take questions, just a high-level clarification. The intent tonight would be to approve 813 if the board chooses, and then on 616, we would just be eliminating that policy tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct. Assuming the changes in the naming rights language were adopted by the board, then we could retire policy 616.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions from board members? Anna, go ahead.
Thank you. Couple of questions. The first of which is kind of big picture. Obviously, I recognize that the intent is to combine the naming of facilities and lands with the monetary donations, sponsorships, and naming rights. But I do think there's almost a distinction between the naming of facilities and lands and the naming rights that are being granted with this policy. So my question is whether that distinction should be made from the standpoint that either if the title should be modified to suggest monetary donations, sponsorships, and naming of facilities and land, and then the naming rights is part of the policy. But that way it speaks to the fact that we're using this to actually make decisions as a board for naming of facilities, not just naming rights, which kind of come with a sponsorship or donation. So I ask that question, or maybe make that comment. My second question is, if I saw in the 813.06 approval that that the naming rights does not apply to a school, but I'm wondering if that might be best placed up in 813.04, the parameters, just to highlight that early on, that the schools do not fall under the naming rights item. So I just asked, I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are on those ideas.
In terms of taking the last, we did have it under 81304 in parameters, and then we moved it to approval. So we definitely had that conversation about
Okay.
where it goes best in committee. So to me, what matters is that it's in there, right?
Sure.
Not necessarily where it is. So if you wanted to make a motion to that effect and have the board discuss that, I believe that would be fine from a policy committee standpoint, since we talked about it in both places.
Okay.
And then in terms of changing the title, I also think that the policy committee would have been amenable to that. So, but because it is from policy committee, the motion's on the floor, so that would take a motion as well.
Okay, perfect. Can I ask one more clarifying question, actually? Under the definitions, we talk about sponsorship, and I'm wondering, I know there was some discussion regarding donor walls. I see that that's acknowledged here, but we also talked about, right, people who are buying a chair from the PAC. Is that part of the sponsorship component that's identified here?
So in terms of like if you were sponsoring a chair, then I believe we had talked about that would fall under sponsorship. From an overall policy level, I do think that when that went out, whatever the ask is from the board or the people that the board has authorized to do this, that we would make clear which bucket we're under, if that makes sense. But when we talked as a policy committee, the consensus was that was in sponsorship. But it was something that.
Which is a separate policy?
I'm sorry, that it's a category of sponsorship.
Yeah.
The feeling was that example did not need to be in there, since that is something that we weren't interested in pursuing in the near future, because the PAC has a revenue mechanism. We charge a seat per chair in order to replace those. So that's why that example isn't in the policy itself.
Okay. Okay.
I just want to add on that note, I think it's really wise that that it not be in here, because we are never going to be talking about naming a chair. You are sponsoring or you are donating, and the recognition that you receive from that is, if in that example is how that's recognition. You are not naming a chair, right? When we're talking about naming, we're talking about, I'm making this up, a tech center or a stadium or something, larger, and things that are like donor walls. You're not naming something on the wall. You're getting recognition for giving. So I'm really glad to see that things like that are not in here, because that shouldn't live in at a policy level.
I don't disagree that it's not considered naming, but it is a sponsorship. I mean, it's a way to raise money.
Yes,
So I guess I'm just saying that that's where that would land. It's not a naming feature. I'm just saying, is that where something like that might live? That's all I'm asking.
Leslie, go ahead.
So just to clarify, so as we were talking as a committee on this, we kind of went back and forth for a very long time, way too long on this. And what we kind of came to the determination is that not every specific type of sponsorship needed to be listed. We just gave kind of a brief overview and a few examples that might be common examples is why, and since we did have already funding for the chairs, we didn't want to add that in as a thought and have people get really confused about, well, why are you charging for chair money every time I'm buying a ticket, as opposed to like you're already saying you can do this. So that's why we chose to leave that specific one out.
And I was purely using that as an example, not saying that this should say you can buy a chair for the PAC. More so like if that type of situation occurred again, how that would be covered, so that as a policy, we have a policy in place that allows for that type of thing, should that be decided at some point in time, that I guess speaks to that. And so from what I'm hearing, the sponsorship category is meant to capture things like that without being specific about a specific program or a specific entity that can or cannot be sponsored or funded for or donated towards. So I think I've got the answer to my question, and I don't want it to be as specific as the PAC chairs. I was using that strictly as an example of a situation that I was aware of.
I'm hearing you'd like to
So I'm
sponsor
good.
200 chairs.
I'm good. So I guess I would like to put a motion on the table to amend the,
Okay.
just,
So
go
let's,
ahead.
sorry, Anna, we don't have a motion on the table yet, so I think we need to take a motion
No policy.
It's a motion on the floor from the policy
from the
committee.
policy. Okay, we don't have to have an official motion from a policy member. Okay.
No, and it doesn't need a second since it's coming from committee.
Okay, so we have a motion officially on the floor. Anna, sorry to interrupt. You were
That's
ready
okay.
to offer an amendment.
Yeah, I would like to amend the title. I'd like to make a motion to amend the title to shift from naming rights to naming of facilities and land, since that's all encompassed within here. And then naming rights is spoken to within the policy as it relates to monetary donations and sponsorships. So I would like to make a motion that the title be amended to monetary donations, sponsorships, and naming of facilities and land. It's a very minor thing, I understand.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor for an amendment. Is there a second? I'll second. Second by Dr. Bush. Any discussion on that amendment?
I'm not in favor of that, mostly because I don't want to be specific in the title. I want it to be able to live, like naming rights here says building, land, park, bridge. It also uses the word facility. And so a naming right doesn't necessarily mean that it's attached to a donation, right? It's just the right to name something from the board. And so I would rather keep that at a higher level and not get really specific. It is a minor change, but to me, it's unnecessary.
Yeah, I'll also echo Heather's comments. I don't support the naming change for the same reason. I'd rather have it be higher level for the longevity. Thanks.
Other discussion on the amendment? Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
So I was interpreting naming rights to be specific to a donation. That's not what this means. Naming rights does not necessarily mean that there's a donation tied to it. Okay.
It may not if it's in regarding a school, right? So when we named Forest Edge, that wasn't a donation. In terms of non-school, I think it's likely it would be with a donation, but I wouldn't want to rule it out because that would be up to the board.
Yeah, I think another example might be a piece of property, right? If someone were to donate a piece of property that would demand, it's a donation, yes, not a monetary donation, but it, yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Any other discussion on the proposed amendment to change the title? All right, so we will vote on that. Katie, call the roll.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? No. Mr. Hensel? No. Ms. Wright? No. Mr. Pinkeretz?
No, that motion fails 2 to 4. Excuse me. So the amended title has failed. So now we're back to our initial motion to approve this policy as printed. Is there any other discussion? Go ahead.
Can someone explain what the discussion was regarding moving the school naming to approval versus in parameters? It just seems odd the way that it reads, the board shall not approve the solicitation of naming rights for a school. I don't know, it seems, it's kind of feels like it should just be that schools do not apply for donations or something. I don't know. I'm just curious how that conversation went as far as where that should.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question, just so I know what you're saying? So are you, I mean, I know you're not amending anything or motioning anything, but are you just saying that this line, the board shall not approve solicitation, is confusing because it isn't living under naming rights?
Either because it's not under naming rights or under the parameters related to, like, we've got parameters, no donation, sponsorship, or naming right shall be construed as nor endorsement. It feels like it belongs kind of up there to say, we're not going to allow schools to be part of the facilities that are named because of monetary donations. That's, I guess, where I'm going with it. But, I mean, again, it's a minor thing. It's in the policy, and I support that. It just feels kind of hidden to me where it is.
I think that was the substance of the discussion, is really where should it be? Should it be with the school piece, or should it, because it talks about approval, be under the approval category, right? And so from a legal lens, I would just like it to be in the policy, and the committee landed on having it under approval because it relates to approval. But really, parameters is where it started and approval is where it landed. So it really would be whatever the board's most comfortable with.
Go ahead, Dr. Bush.
So I'll just chime in very quickly on how I see things. I was okay with the title change because ultimately I don't think the title matters. It's the policy that matters. And also I think what's in the policy is what matters. And the fact is that I think the policy, whether we move it or not, I think it's there. And I think that's what really matters. I do understand Anna's perspective entirely as far as clarity and kind of how the language is constructed. So again, I would be amenable to considering moving the language, but the fact of the matter is that the language is in there. I think the policy is solid. And again, I'll say what I said when I started. The title doesn't matter too much to me. It's what the policy says that really matters. And I think that's what I'm most satisfied with, is I think the policy is a good policy.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right. So can we call the roll, Katie?
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Hensel? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. We have a new policy 813. Yeah, sorry. I should have clarified. It gets confusing when we go through amendments. My apologies. Thank you for that and the policy committee. And I realize that we have visioning on one side of the table and policy committee members on the other side tonight. So, yeah, thanks, Katie. That's helpful. Yeah. All right, so we are now going to move on to C2, Policy 616, Naming of Facilities and Land, and we are looking to retire this policy. And we don't need a motion because it comes to us from Policy Committee, so is there any discussion? Go ahead, Dr. Bush.
I will just say that in my other life, I really enjoy retiring policy. It just feels like, so I'm excited about this. Anytime. I served on the policy committee in the faculty senate for years and years, and we were always creating new policy and like complicating things. And every once in a while we'd vote on a policy to get rid of it. And I was like, this is fantastic. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
All right, Katie, please call the roll.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. Hensel? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. We no longer have policy 616. All right, moving right along, C3, 2025-2026 preliminary budget. We will turn that over to Mr. Weiland.
Thank you. Let me get to the next slide. Oh, there you go. Thank you. Appreciate that. So kudos to Erica for coming up with this graphic because I think it's a good way for us to remember where we are in the process. What's a little strange is we're not even halfway through the graphic, yet the school year has already started, and we have kids in school, and everything's kind of chugging along. So I think the thing to take away from that is kind of the reason why we did the June estimate was to make sure that we had some level of a plan in place before the school year started, or even the fiscal year starting on July 1. So even though there's lots of whatever those graphics are to the right, the majority of the work, the majority of the structure to the budget is already pretty well established. All we're down to now is kind of things that are important, but very kind of high level type of things. And it's only because of information that we don't quite have yet. So that's what I would take away from that. The annual meeting and the original budget adoption, just real quick about the process here. We are doing the annual meeting next week. The process that I'm sorry, two weeks from now, correct. The next, what we're doing this evening basically is approving the preliminary budget so that we can put it in the paper for the annual meeting. But that's not even the end of the process because of the kind of Frankenstein nature of the school funding in Wisconsin. We have this thing called the original budget, which doesn't get in place until the levy is ready to happen, which it doesn't happen until October. And that's because of a couple different things that I'll mention to you just in a second here. And again, early 90s revenue limits were kind of put in place that kind of changed the process. Usually the annual meeting was kind of the end, and now it's not the end anymore. The original budget cannot be adopted until we know the equalization aid formula. And I was just refreshing myself on that process. FYI, and if we go back to the graphic, you'll see we might have a little issue that we'll have to work through. That equalization aid number is not certified typically until October 15th. So that is 2 days after our potential work session on the budget. So we'll have to kind of work through that a little bit. And I've got a couple different ideas on how we can do that if we don't want to set up another meeting. Tonight, Board of Education is just considering the preliminary budget for publication. We actually have it all ready to go. It will be changed, okay? Things are going to change between now and then, just like they changed from the preliminary budget in June till tonight. Since all information is not known at the annual meeting, there will be some changes, and I'll talk about those things in just a second. The big four are the unknowns. State equalization aid, I just mentioned, we don't get that certified to us until October 15th. Enrollments. Katie is busy trying to identify where our students have gone. In a lot of cases, we know who's here, but in a lot of cases, we have unenrollments, and we don't know where those students are until somebody contacts us and lets us know that they've left, or they might just be sick for the first week or so of school. So we're trying to kind of figure those things out. And there's a lot of different situations that have to be investigated, so to speak. So, and then assessed values, those typically aren't known until the end of September or October 1st, and that really determines our levy rates. Lastly, and this is, I put an asterisk on this today, school levy credit. Actually, we have a pretty good estimate of the school levy credit because the information was actually was calculated by the last 3 school levies in an averaging formula. So we actually do have a pretty good idea what the school levy credit is. We do have another piece of information that comes out, but it's actually after our levy. So I should probably just get rid of that idea. And since we do have a state budget, then we actually know what's happening to that allocation. Some expenses changed since June, so we thought we'd just quickly mention those. We have budgeted a $3.5 million transfer to debt service to help lower the levy in that regard. That's up from 2.6, and kind of a response to some of the additional revenues that we've got through special education and open enrollment types of revenue sources. So that's a good thing. That creates some flexibility for us going into the future. Other areas of the general budget that have increased include summer school. We've been fortunate enough to kind of grow summer school over the last year or so. When you grow it has an impact on revenues, but it also has an impact on expenses because we offer additional courses and stuff like that. So we have to try to keep those things aligned. Funding for staff computer replacements was something that we kind of tripped upon about, believe it or not, about 5 years ago. There was this thing called COVID that came and kind of hit us, and we actually had to provide computers to all of our staff members, and we have continued that practice. And so we've tried to incorporate that into not having desktops in everybody, but actually having laptops in order to save some funds. But those laptops do, after about 5 years, not work as well as they used to. So we have got into a process now of basically twofold. Having funds, we were able to find some funds to actually replace those staff computers right now, but also to create kind of a sinking fund, if you would, so that in 5 years we don't have to come up with several $100,000. We've actually got the funds put aside, and that's kind of, they go into actually carryover, which is something we've talked about in the past, so that the technology department has those funds ready in 5 years. A couple things. Substitute allocations, we did a quick review of what kind of the market rate for substitutes is, and we had to make some adjustments in that. Capital maintenance, we also looked at that, and since we had a little bit of flexibility in the budget this year, we did take that allocation from $850,000 to $900,000 a year. I would say that's still low based on the amount of square footage that we have, but it's a step in the right direction. And then if you live in the Village of Oregon, which is the majority of our buildings, you know that sewer and water rates are going up fairly significantly, so we made some adjustments in that area as well. Open enrollment has been updated based on state law. Those allocations were increased, and I think I touch on that in a graph here in a minute. And then staff have been updated based on what their benefits are, as well as the new salary schedules that we've approved. And then some just minor adjustments to grants and those contracts. The preliminary budget does conclude, and this is our tradition, a budget contingency of $50,000. If we would ever use that or need that, we would come to the board and ask for the use of those funds. Property tax impacts, that's what everybody likes to kind of talk a little bit about. So what impacts property taxes? And we have something that I don't think we've spent a lot of time on, but during the work session, I did give the board a little information about this. These are voucher programs, the first two. One is for students that don't access IEPs, and the second one, SNSP, is for students that do access IEPs, as well as independent charter schools that are out there. And I'm going to show a little graph on showing what that impact is. The important thing to understand there is we don't even know who those students are. We're just basically kind of a revenue source, so to speak, for those vouchers. We are told in the October 15th certification what those amounts are, and we just pass those numbers on in our levy, and then they go out to DPI, who allocates the funds to the voucher schools. We know who the schools are. We know the FTE at each individual school, but we don't know who the students are. Transfer service requests, we've talked about this before. We're at about 431,000 this year. Those are, I'm sorry, yeah.
Could I just ask a quick question before we get off of this slide?
You bet.
The 307 that's the vouchers that are, I see 245, 741, but what's the WPCP?
So it counts for, Wisconsin, Katie, can you help me? It's the voucher program, essentially. Yep. One's for students without IEPs, the first one. There you go. And the second one is for students that access IEPs. The transfer service is typically students that have needs that came from other governmental entities that were servicing those students that have now moved on to the Oregon School District, and we are able to adjust our revenues associated with taking care of those students in whatever the prior governmental unit had determined that they needed. So that could be birth to 3, that could be students actually from even outside the state if they have individual education plans, we can look at the needs that are in there. And then if we have to add something, we typically do that so that we can service the students. So we're given an exemption to the revenue limit for that purpose. This is a new thing, and it's something that I would hope that we could talk about during that work session. We have $2.5 million for additional debt service defeasance, currently budgeted in the preliminary budget. That's something that we could change. Last year we did 1.25 million, if you recall. And it's something that I think we should just talk about when we talk about the impact of property taxes on our constituents in that work session. So something to talk a little bit more about. Then there's the $3.5 million transfer from Fund 10 to debt service in order to lower that levy and lower the impact I mentioned a little bit before this. There was a decrease in the community ed levy, and that's because we actually ended the levy the year last year with about $100,000 in carryover. You can't really have carryover in the community ed levy, so therefore it's kind of a subtraction to the levy, if you would. That will actually help reduce the levy. We had a very successful year last year in community ed, and we also had a position or two that were empty during the year, so those funds didn't get spent, so that becomes a decrease to the levy. We do have, and this is important, $170,000 or $108,000 reduction in state aid. That's because of our property values increasing, and basically where we are in relationship to other school districts, as well as no additional funds being put into the equalization aid formula for the schools, for the entire state. And that also has an impact on our levy because we were given an additional $325 to spend per student, and there was no additional funding associated with that. So the legislature absolutely knew that they were basically pushing this property tax burden onto property taxpayers this year. And so that is going to manifest itself when we do our levy. So, all right, going back. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Dr. Bush.
Could I just ask a quick clarifying question?
You bet.
So the second bullet point, the 43159,
Transfer service.
Is that money in or money out?
It's money in.
That's what I thought.
Yep, and it's part of the levy. So
Okay.
of the revenue limit, the $325 per students we get, we have certain exemptions. The main exemption that we're accessing this year is the transfer of service.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we talked about those voucher programs and the independent school costs. That is just the school district of Oregon School District is basically acting as a pass-through for this that we have no control over. This is the growth over the last 6 years, the last being an estimate. We don't know exactly, and you see that it kind of levels off. That's simply because we use the same numbers that were in last year. If the trend continues, it will go up. The reason it goes up a little bit right now is because we use the new allocations that we know, but we don't know the FTE yet. So we'll find that out in October. So you get a feel kind of for what's happening from the voucher perspective, as well as that our property taxpayers are paying for these students to go to these schools. The rate increases, I thought we'd give you a little idea of historically what's going on with rate increases. 23-24 was a pretty big year for rate increases, but you can see as we go to the right that they continue to be increased, and the black bar that's on there is how much money we get in addition each year as compared to the individual programs that are on there. So you can kind of see the black bar seems to be the lowest bar on all of those graphs, and all the other programs seem to be getting a little bit more money each year. It's just something to point out. Yeah.
The black bar to my eye looks like that's an unchanging number. Is that
well, now
correct?
It is. That's the $325 that was kind of codified with the state Supreme Court ruling this last summer. So yes, that's the last 4 years. It's the same number.
Okay.
That 325. All right. So this is what I affectionately call, and I know it's a multi-column spreadsheet, but it is my favorite sheet in the world because in one sheet it tells everything that's going on in the school district. And I won't read every number to you, but I'll just kind of mention it to you a little bit, some of the different things that are happening. The transfer column is something that I think most people find interesting. So it's the fourth column from the left. And you'll see that of the Fund 10, which is our general fund, which most things are run from the school district, we have about a $10.6 million reduction or transfer out of. And then that's feeding the special education fund at about $7 million. So even though we did have an increase in categorical reimbursement this last year, we are still projecting to transfer $7 million from the general fund to the special education fund. The debt service transfer, we talked about this a couple times, that $3.5 million, that's going to debt service to help reduce the property tax impact. And then small amounts, but you guys actually talked about the chairs and the PAC, so thank you for that segue. The $12,000 is actually the amount of money that we would project to capture for the chairs from 10 that we collect in Fund 10, but then we move into Fund 46, which is our capital improvement fund, so that those funds are reserved for that purpose in the future. And then the last one is the almost $20,000, which was approved in the referendum back in 2022 for our food service to help provide more competitive wages for our food service staff. So that's that column. Fund balances is the next orange column, so that kind of shows what's going on there. And the right column, the last, is the budget excess or deficiencies. That's kind of what's happening between the two orange columns, right? So you can see we did budget our carryover funds, about $2.4 million to be expended. I know that those won't all be expended this last year, but in order to have the ability to spend those, we always budget them as an expense. So if all the assigned fund balances or carryover dollars were spent, the orange column next to that, the $19 million, would be how much money that's left. It will not happen, but just that's what would happen if we were to spend all those funds. Special projects, you see $390,000. That's the approximate value of what's in the Fund 21 for the use of the splash pad. So that those funds are expended or budgeted to be expended this year. The grant would be a revenue and an expense. So, and quite honestly, I'm not sure it would happen this fiscal year. It might actually happen next fiscal year. So when we get both of those, we would recognize those as well. If we think it's going to happen this year as we get into the year, then we would obviously budget it during budget adjustments in typically May or June. Special Education Fund has to have a zero budget at the end of the year, and so that's what we budget there. The transfer is the number that will change based on how much we spend. And then the long-term capital improvement fund, that's an increase just basically on interest as well as the chair revenue, the $12,000 there. And we don't have any planned projects at this point in time, but we are working on a couple that might come from that capital long-term capital improvement project fund. Food service, we are hoping for a zero impact this year after a slight decrease in fund balance last year, so that's a good thing. The employee trust funds, we are looking to increase that budget, or I'm sorry, that fund balance, because we anticipate increasing a benefit for our employees who were not grandfathered with the previous system for OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which basically relates to health insurance for some of our employees. So we'll be talking about that this fall as we get ready to implement that new benefit, but we have budgeted for an increase in funds into that in order to compensate for the cost of it. The pool, oh boy, my eyesight is starting to struggle as well as probably your guys's. let's see here. Okay, the next one, my OPEB was, I was thinking that was 260. I skipped a line. I apologize. That's actually $683,000 increase for the OPEB fund. The Employee Trust Fund was the other fund that has 260. Those two funds are actually kind of linked together from DPI's perspective. They only recognize one, but we break it out. The $260,000 is the amount of money minus the amount of money that we're spending, that we're putting aside to pay for our employee benefits, and that's for sick leave conversion purposes. The idea here is that we're going to build that fund up so that we have kind of a consistent transfer per year rather than dealing with the ebbs and flows of when people retire. So we actually had the actuary say that a couple times fast, basically forecast out from a 30-year basis what our allocation should be on a flat line basis, and so that we won't have to worry about going up and down. And that difference, that 260,000, says that the actuary is anticipating us to be able to put a little bit more in than we'd spend this year, in anticipation for the future where the expenses will be higher. Then we get to the OPEB that I've already mentioned, so I won't mention that before. And then you see basically zeros in the orange column. That's because those last four things, the first three of the four are actually community service funds. Again, DPI doesn't necessarily break these out, but as I said on the other ones, they're supposed to have a zero balance at the end of the year. So we budget a zero balance for those. And so the negatives there are based on the balances that they had at the end of this year. And as I said before, the idea here is that we would use those extra amounts that are in there to get to zero, basically to under levy to get to zero. The last one has become less of a fund for us, as we are not the administrative agency for the Carl Perkins grant, which is a federal grant anymore. We just basically do our own. So the only funds left in these Cooperative Purchase Fund 99 for us we are the administrative agent for the Badger Conference. And so that's the remaining funds in there. The 95 revenue to expenses is basically just associated with running the conference costs. There are a couple people, 3 or 4 people that are involved in running the Badger Conference, and they get stipends associated with that. And there are probably, I think there might be some refereeing costs and that type of thing in there as well. Any questions on my favorite sheet? All right.
Sorry, I do have one question. So, Andy, could you walk us through Debt Service Fund 39?
Sure.
Specifically, if someone viewing this meeting or looking at the budget, they're going to see that 11.8 million number this year, which is significantly larger than our past few years. So I think but yet we have not taken on any new debt. So I think this would be a good graphic to kind of step us through the columns and how that all ties together.
You bet. So we did budget for the extra funds that we were budgeting here, the $2.5 million that I mentioned before, as well as the accumulated money that's in that fund, as well as the normal debt service payments. But those other two things that I mentioned firstly would be used to defease some debt. And so we would anticipate that amount being approximately $5.5 million that we could defease. So if we're going to defease it, and I put it in there just in case we do. If we don't, then not a big deal. But if we do come up with a plan to defease debt by the end of the fiscal year, we'd have the authority to basically spend that extra money. So our normal debt schedule is ever $6-some million off the top of my head, maybe 6.3 or so. And then this extra 5.5 million would be used for defeasement purposes. And I apologize for not mentioning that in the expenditure column, but that's what that purpose is.
Yeah, so can you just do the math to get to the 5.5 additional here?
Sure. So it's it's about $3 million that has accumulated within the debt service fund, and then $2.5 million, which we would levy in addition to defease. So we'd combine the $3 million plus the 2.5 to get to 5.5.
Okay.
Above the regular debt payment schedule.
6.3. Got it. Thank you. That's helpful.
Bet. Trying to think if there's any other things that are in that expenditure column that look weird or anything, but I don't think so. I'll just mention that the debt service fund, if we did that, there is still 1.154 million in that fund. That's because by bond council and state, I think, statutory requirements, we have to have the money in the fund in order to pay our following September debt payments before we get to levy again. So that's super, super important from a cash flow perspective. In fact, a number of years ago, we had a financial advisor, like 20 years ago, kind of messed that up, and we had to do a transfer from the Fund 10 to Fund 30 to make sure that we had enough money in there to make those September payments. So something that we're very, very cognizant of when we're budgeting. Other questions on the sheet? Okay. We'll continue on. We're getting close. Just trying to look at the levy and what we had anticipated it to be. Here are some amounts audited the last 2 years, as well as what we currently project based on this budget. So the levy would go up approximately 5.5%. I had that on a screen here. That's going from the 43.6 million to the 46,033 is about a 5.5% increase. Interestingly, and I think I mentioned this in the agenda item, the school levy credit, even though no additional funds were put into it, because our levy has gone up a little bit faster because of the referendum over the last 3 years compared to everybody else, we anticipate almost $400,000 in additional levy credit to come. So if you factor that in, we're actually closer to about a 4.6% increase in our levy. It does impact municipalities differently because municipalities have multiple school districts in them. And so for instance, the Village of Oregon, I can tell you for sure what that number is going to be. It's going to be a positive number. We're in a municipality that we represent a smaller component of it. They could actually see a decrease based on what the other school districts in that community have done. So just FYI, we'll get into that in the work session a little bit. The rate that's there, the 944 last year to 924, actually does go down 2%. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. I would anticipate from a residential perspective, I've done the initial analysis, and I don't have perfect information except for a couple municipalities that are entirely within Oregon School District. And there's only, I think, 3 of them out of like the 11, depending on the county designation and those types of things. Because I don't have full information of what's going on in all those different municipalities that are multi-jurisdictional, I would anticipate the average residential increase being about 2% for school property taxes based on this levy increase. That's because of basically the school levy credit as well as new construction. New construction helps kind of diversify the base of who's paying the property taxes in the first year that the new construction hits the tax rolls. And so and we'll get into that more in the work session. Trying to think if there's anything else. I will also say that there is a varying degree of what I would anticipate as a property tax impact based on the municipality. My range right now is projected at anywhere between a 1.4% decrease to about an 8% increase. So again, the assessment practices of the individual municipalities, as well as just what's going on in those municipalities, does have quite a varying impact. So just something to keep in mind as we kind of go through this process. Any questions about that? Yeah.
I have a question on this
You bet.
sheet, and I feel like it's a really dumb one, so bear with me.
You bet.
I'm looking at this and saying, is this saying in the 24-25 budget we spent 40? What are we saying here? What is
So this is just the school levy. It's
Okay.
not what we spend. It's not the expenditure. It's
there it
only
is,
the levy.
what we levied?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
And sorry, one more time. Why are we levying less this for the budget for the the anticipated budget for next year?
Why are we levying? No, we're actually going up about 5.5%.
Why? Oh my God,
It
I
goes
just
left
can't
to
read
right.
the
43 to
numbers.
46.
That's why I was reading
okay.
that. I was reading that as 40. Sorry, I was reading that as 43, and we were going down 600K. Sorry.
Nope.
Okay. Monday night.
That's okay. No problem. No problem. Any other questions? All right. Well, that's my next slide, actually. What questions do you have for me other than kind of what we've gone through? Again, this is preliminary. It's just something to kind of put on the table to start the process. The annual meeting will stick with these numbers. We'll talk a little bit about them again, as well as I'll probably spend about 10 minutes or so, maybe 5 to 10 minutes on what happened last year, which was all good things, just as a kind of review from that perspective, as well as get into this. And then the changes really are because of those three main things that kind of happened between now and the end of October.
Andy, your preliminary estimates on increase for the levy, which board member or members area is that within the high number, the 8%?
That would be the town of Dunn.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's Heather and Leslie.
I think
think.
Leslie's in
No?
Fitchburg.
Oh,
You are in Fitchburg too? Yep.
oh, so that's me. I'm Tona Dunn then. It is with Fitchburg, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, as far as the representation.
Representation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah. I got you.
yep. Okay. Questions for Andy? Heather, go ahead.
Do you want questions only or questions and comments?
We can do both.
Okay. Okay, comments, I always like to start with a positive. Andy, you mentioned the referendum, but I just think anytime we look at a budget, how thankful we have to be for our community supporting the school
Absolutely.
district and the referendum that passed, because this would be, not that this is a rosy view of school finance, but it would be way, way, way worse. And so just so grateful that we're able to exist with a past referendum, and what a difference that makes. So I wanted to start there. And then also thankful for you and your experience in putting this together, even though I can't read. But other than that, it was really excellent. And thank you that's a lot of time, and you have a lot of variables and nebulous information to deal with. So thank you for always keeping on top of that. I guess this is part worry and question. So I was thinking about what worries me about this. So I just want to make sure. So the food service, we're at 119,000 that we're going to have to transfer, which means that we're short,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Which I realize, I think that's better than we thought. So like we can celebrate that it's 120,000, not something higher than that, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of, that's still not great, right? Or we're still in a negative balance, and we're going to have to pull money and
Well, we're actually hoping not to spend any fund balance, which is what we did last year.
okay.
So we're getting to neutral with that. I will say that when we came up with the referendum question, we kind of anticipated that this would be an issue for us
Okay.
for the future. In the perfect situation, I'd love for us not to have to do that transfer, but I think it's going to be a while before we get to that point.
Right, but just to, and yes, and to be clear, but we are doing a transfer, and that is taking, if we could be self-sustaining in food service,
That would be ideal.
then that 119,000 could be used for
Absolutely.
other things. Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's a minor worry in the scheme of things, but just a worry. Okay, then always, I can't say this enough about, that we're still using, even after the budget increase for special education, we're still transferring $7 million a year from our general fund. So I think it used to be closer to 8. So I guess we could be, thankful is a strong word. We could be glad that it's not that high.
It's not going the other way.
It's not going the other way. And so that's still because of the budget not more strongly supporting across the state special education school districts, and Oregon is not the only one. It's across the state that we're having to transfer
Absolutely.
a huge amount of money from our general fund into special education.
Absolutely.
Which is absolutely the right thing to do, and that is not anti-special education. It's anti that we're not being fully supported to provide what wonderful services that we do and are required by law. Okay. Then my next worry, I just want to make sure I've got this right, that you said it, we're basically shifting the burden to taxpayers.
Yeah, the state did that when they approved this last budget.
Right.
They very clearly allocated no additional funds for any type of property tax relief, which has been something that for the
Right.
last 10 years they've strategically done every year. And so, yeah, very curious as to why they decided to do that, but I think it's very important that we share with the constituents that that was a decision they made.
So just agreed. So just to clarify, obviously there was a tax burden from school districts across the state to property tax owners, but there used to be a property tax relief.
Yeah, the
credit.
the two main sources of that relief are the state equalization aid formula,
Right.
which is kind of, I like to say we're a dual income family.
Yep.
One is property taxes and the other one is state aid, and they're kind of linked together, which is not really how families work. But in this situation, we're told how much we can spend, and basically, based on the characteristics of the community that you live in and the students go to school in, that determines what the balance is between those two revenue sources. So that's, they decided to put no additional funds into the state equalization aid formula, which then left the property tax levy to increase. And then they have this kind of, covert way to provide property tax relief through this thing called the school levy credit. And the last 2 years, last biennium, they put a significant hundreds of
Right.
millions of dollars into that, and they chose not to put any money into that this last year.
So it's on both sides, right? Like neither grown up in the dual income household was able to get a raise.
Well,
Or it
the one that
decreased.
the state aid component wouldn't, and then basically the other person, the other breadwinner had to bring in a lot more money.
Right. But I mean, so I guess that's what I want to be clear about, is that we're not getting any additional support in equalization aid, and there's so that's additional tax burden.
Correct.
And then there's no tax credit or relief from that. So
Correct.
Okay, that is a big worry. Okay, I just want to get that clear for anybody who's listening or as we get through that, because I think something I didn't understand before I got on the school board is just that. So sorry to belabor a point. Okay, and then my last worry is just, we don't have to talk at length, but about vouchers and how that affects our budget, because that number is increasing. And anything else, I know you've covered it, but anything else you want to add on the voucher?
No, the graph probably undersells it a little bit, because quite honestly, we think it's probably going to continue to increase.
Right.
And so that is a worry for us, because again, that's a number we have no control over at all. It's just, we're a pass through.
And that's a worry. Again, these my worries are not Oregon school district worries. I mean, we're the Oregon School District Board of Education, but this is a statewide theme. So it's not something that's just an Oregon issue. It's across the state.
Sure.
Okay, those are worries. I have one question, actually. Thank you for letting me talk through all of that. The one thing I just wanted to ask about is on the splash pad in Fund 21.
Yep.
So expenditures include $390,000 for the splash pad. Can you talk a little bit more about the expenditures of that, and also just where the funding from that is coming from? Because if I'm not wrong, it is not coming. There has been money in for it to go out.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that,
Yeah,
please?
so the 390,000 has actually been the funds that have been collected since this process started. And there's an additional $320,000 that we'll get from a state DNR grant for active participation in the state. We went through a competitive process in order to do that. And we recently signed the contract with the Department of Natural Resources once they got it from the federal government, because there is a federal government revenue source for them, to basically codify the funding for us. So as soon as we have the splash pad active and working, we will file for reimbursement for that purpose, so that we can get reimbursed the $320,000.
Okay, that's new to me, or maybe I'm just remembering it for the first time. So, sorry. Thanks. So the 320 we lay out first,
Correct.
and then
But we have a contract.
We have a contract to
Yep.
get it back. Okay, so
Yep.
then, but 390.
Is donations that have been collected over the last,
So we have 390 in our bank account
Yep.
already. That's not including any. Like, I know that there were some pledges or some future
Yep,
dollars.
yep.
That's real cash in the bank
that's real
that can be
cash in the
spent.
bank, yep.
So in
And there are some more pledges. They're not huge, but there is some money that's still pledged.
right, but we're not counting that in
Nope.
this 390. This is real. Okay, and then 300. So 390 plus 320 is 710. So that is the splash pad, whatever. Because again, that's not school district funding. That's coming from other sources that we are now the holder of.
Right.
The cost to finalize this splash pad will not exceed 710.
Well, it'd probably go over just by those pledges that are out there, but yeah, it would be that. So for instance, one community bank has pledged
Right.
a certain amount of money. They've given us, I think, 2/5 of it right now, and we'll get another 1/5 of it, I believe, this year. And then the next couple of years, we'll get a little bit more.
So I'm not clear if that's something that the board talks about, or if that's not in our purview, but my understanding is we weren't going to, like, we don't have that money yet. It's a pledge, right? But so my understanding was the school district was not going to outlay any money that we didn't have. So I don't know where that, maybe that can be in the workshop or in another conversation, but I have concerns about that. And I also have concerns, I didn't see where the splash pad's ongoing operational costs are living in this budget. And my understanding is that we don't, like, where are those funds being pulled from to?
Well, we don't anticipate them to be huge, but we will not be operational until probably June of next year, so there would only be a month or so of that.
Okay.
And I can, maybe during the workshop, we can kind of work through what those anticipated costs are. But again, they're fairly minor. The biggest cost associated with the splash pad would probably be 20 years down the road when, you need to replace components of it or something of that nature.
Right. So I guess that's where that's down the road, but again, in this financial environment that we're in, as you know, every dollar counts. And so I want to be really clear, and also, I guess, have the discussion in the workshop about the pledge dollars, because maybe that's something that can be held for ongoing expenses, as opposed to spending every dime we have and then some, and then having nothing in the bank, so to speak, to handle this. Because I guess here's what my take is. I am nervous. I worry, again, that the school district, even though wonderful things have been fundraised and wonderful people in the community have supported it, it's something that is going to live with the school district and we will ultimately be responsible for. So I just want to make sure that that's accurately, mentioned in the budget, and that the board has a full view of that. Okay.
I want to piggyback on some of Heather's, and thank you, Heather, for being very, very detailed. Detailed, and bringing concerns to the board. Andy, thank you for all of your work. I want to go back to Special Education Fund 27.
Yeah.
And we talked about the $7 million that we are transferring because our legislature doesn't feel like it's important enough to fund correctly. So did that end up as a 29% because of, I can't remember the word,
So
some certain, thank you.
Yes, some certain compared to some sufficient, yeah. That's a huge distinction.
Yes, so is that correct?
So
Did it end up-
29 and a half is where we kind of landed for last year.
For
What
last
we
year.
anticipate for this year is 39 and a half. And if you read the bill, they were talking about like 42%. So we've
Right.
already kind of discounted by about 2.5% based on what we anticipate happening.
And that's where I was going to ask you, was because if you had broken down based on the amount they allocated, because it's the amount they allocated for the entire state.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
And that it's broken down
It's based
per
on what everybody actually spent last year. Mm-hmm. And so when we have the ability to access that data from the Department of Public Instruction, and so we start doing some calculations and try to figure out what it's actually going to prorate at. And our estimate right now is 39 and a half.
So, but with that, over the last several years, the costs for special education have been going up and up and up
Significantly.
based on the need that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a need out there, and we should be taking care of that. But so looking at that fact that is going up and up and up, do you feel like looking at those dollars that we really truly will end up with that 39 and a half?
Yeah, not the 42 that they kind of promised, but the
Right.
39 and a half we feel is a pretty good estimate. A lot of us business managers kind of are using the same number from a budgeting perspective based on the information that we've gotten.
So what does that look like? I know this is asking you to like future crystal ball and all that kind of stuff. What kind of transfer does that look like for next year for us? I mean, are we 5 million? Are we?
No, because next year there is an additional allocation. Off the top of my head, I'm not remembering what it is, but it does go up a little bit more next year as well. And so, but expenses will go up as well.
Right.
And so, my hope is, maybe that 7 million becomes, 6.5 or something of that
So still
nature.
really high.
Still very high.
Still a lot.
Yep.
And if we're having that, and then every other district in the state of Wisconsin is having that same kind of issue, maybe not necessarily the same dollar amounts, but still a
It's-
significant amount.
Absolutely. It is something that I think will continue to be a point of discussion as we get into the next biennium.
Hopefully, as we get into the next biennium, our legislatures will understand the need a little bit clearer. Thank you.
You bet.
Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I thank you very much for the great presentation. I would like to talk a little bit more about the vouchers and what that means. I just want to make sure I understand, like, does that affect, that doesn't change the revenue limit? Or
It
does
actually
it?
does. It
Okay,
actually does.
so-
It creates a one-time exception. The amount of money that we're told, kind of in October, that we have to provide to the DPI, who then provides it to the voucher schools, we get a one-year exemption for the revenue limit to pay for that. So we are simply a pass-through. So what we have to recognize that expense as well as that revenue. And the point is that basically these voucher schools and the charter schools are being funded based on property taxpayers. And it really is, depends on, and I'm gonna,
Okay,
I'll say
can
this.
Can
Yeah,
I
go
pause
ahead.
you for just a
Yep,
second?
yep.
Okay, and you say that because if there are, let's call it the $250,000 or $300,000 worth of vouchers
Yeah,
that they're predicting are estimated from our school district,
yep,
then we're going to increase
our levy.
our taxable authority by that $300,000. And then we get the $300,000 and then it goes to the families who are requesting it for the voucher,
I believe it goes actually to the individual voucher schools.
to the school.
Yep.
So it's a payment to the school. So it does affect, it's not reducing our ability to spend money, but it is impacting how much we tax the community.
Correct.
Because there's not additional funding coming from the state to pay for this, is there?
No, there is not.
So there's no additional money coming from the state. They're saying you have to pay the schools, and so you have to tax your community for those payments.
Correct.
Okay, I just needed to make that clear. Thank
Yep,
you.
Yep. The only thing I was going to mention is that number and its growth over the last several years is alarming. Compared to other districts, it's fairly small. So the impact of this varies widely based on where you are in the state. But it is a concern because it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and quite honestly, it happened fairly quickly.
Thank you for that explanation. That's helpful. I did have one other, maybe it's a silly question or an easy question, or maybe it's not. But I noticed in the revenue side, on the revenue side of things in our Fund 10, we were showing an estimate of interest income
Yes.
of like 600 and some thousand dollars. And we've now shown that to be at 450. Is that to be conservative, or is there something that's changed that we're anticipating less interest income
I'm going to
for
go
the
with
following year?
Yeah, I'm going to go with yes.
Okay.
So it is probably a little conservative, but it's based on, if you hear the conversation related to the Fed, the short-term interest rates that are out there. There is a lot of political pressure and perhaps even some economic pressure now to lower the interest rate. And that federal interest rate really decides how much money we make on our savings accounts. And that really drives a number like this. So if that number is, we get 4.5%, 5% this last year, maybe that number is only 4% this year. So it starts decreasing. We do have an additional fund balance, which helps kind of offset part of that. But it's probably a little bit on the conservative side right now. I just don't know how fast it's going down. And you may be, even in the last week, people went from a 1/4 point to now people are starting to talk about 3/4 of a point decrease in the Fed. That will have a direct impact on all of our savings account returns as well as the school district.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I'd be remiss if I didn't at least jump in. So Andy, great work as always, as everybody has already mentioned. Just really appreciate the discussion and the dialogue to make sure that our board and everybody listening has a solid understanding of all the variables, all the moving parts and pieces. So maybe just a couple of quick questions. So when we look at the 21.6 million for the fund balance on 7/1 of 2025,
Yeah.
roughly what was that at 7/1 of 2024?
I would say 18 point some million or so, something like that.
Okay, so in other words, what we're showing then is the unspent money from the prior school year, as you have noted in the board packet that's online and everything, that gooses that number up to the 21.5, so therefore spending it down puts it back to about the level where it was last year. So you're just essentially rolling those funds forward.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
I mean, at face value, right, it looks like we approved because back in June, we approved the preliminary budget,
Right.
which was balanced. And so
Right.
this one shows in OpEx now at 2.4 million.
That is just carryover, really.
Correct. So I want to make really clear that the history of that number, that 7/1/2025, the start of the new fiscal year, is including the underspent funds from the prior school year in it.
Absolutely.
Therefore, we're taking that forward into this year.
Yeah.
All of the variability across state funding, timing, all the pieces you and everybody's mentioned all roll into the uncertainty of why that jump has happened. But I
Right.
just wanted to mention that and thank you for helping us walk through and understand all that so that we remain good fiscal stewards. So thank you.
You bet.
Many of my questions have already been asked and answered, so I just want to, I guess, follow up on the whole some certain, some sufficient discussion that came up with Leslie's question. I don't recall. I think it's great that we're already figuring that the number is going to be lower, the percentage is going to be lower than it was what was written into the law because of the some certain idea. I can't remember, and I just wanted to ask you if you can tell us in the last couple, this is my third budget. In the last couple budgets, has the number that the state has set aside for special education funding at the end of the year, has it been less than we had thought it was going to be, or has it been more?
Yeah.
My thinking is it's been a little bit less every time, right?
Yeah, especially this last year was a little bit of a surprise, quite honestly. The expenses went up a little bit faster. I think the numbers were the expenses the prior year, so this is 23-24, went up about 8%, but the legislature had anticipated only going up 3%. And so that difference of that 5% reduced the proration for everybody by at least 1% or so. So it was a little bit of a shock. To us, it was in the $100,000 range. Now, we came out of last year okay, but, that was something that we hadn't anticipated, and the unfortunate thing is they don't start doing projections until like January, February for the year you're in. And so that's why we took it upon ourselves to start doing our own projections a little bit and trying to discount those percentages so that we're not surprised as well in the future.
Yeah, thank you. That was my recollection. I just wanted to make sure I was remembering correctly.
Correct.
The other thing that I will say, and this is kind of again, piggybacking on many of the things that have been said previously, and this is just a comment that speaks to education funding in general. I was just a couple days ago, right? I saw that revenue collection was actually even higher than it was projected by a significant number, like 60-some million dollars, right? That the state revenue collection was a little bit higher than they even had anticipated, which I guess would mean that the budget surplus is even a little bit bigger than it was previously. And I think it's just important for us to think about the fact that we're continuing, and this is something that's not unique to our district, that districts across the state are continuing to have to do these transfers of funds and referendums and other ways to get creative to fund our schools when there's a significant chunk of money out there, and it looks like it's even a little bit bigger than it was anticipated being. And I think that it's important that both as community members, but also as school board members, and I think also too the organizations that represent school boards and school districts across the state really continue to push these issues and talk about these issues, the special education funding and just education funding in general, because we continue to see these challenges every year, and they're not going away. There's been some progress, like we said, but when you get beneath the surface and you start talking about some certain, right, and that the number that, even though there's more, it looks like more money for special education, and it is more money, that at the end of the year, it could be a little bit less than what it actually looks like because of the way those funds are set aside. And I think it's just important that we recognize that and continue to talk about it and continue to push for discussion of education funding, because it's why we're all here. So that's all I want to say.
I will just add one thing that I usually wanted to mention in the presentation and I didn't. So it's interesting because, people start talking about percentages and dollars, and there was a strategic point at some point in time in school funding in Wisconsin where people started converting dollars and $325 per student. And maybe that sounds like a lot of money, but that's like a 2% increase. Now CPI is in the 3% range, or maybe high twos right now. But I just want to mention that because I think sometimes the legislatures got a little irritated at the 400-year veto and all that kind of stuff. And I want to kind of say the 325 is not even a cost of living increase. So I think it's important to just kind of underscore that a little bit for people to kind of understand what struggles we've been working through. So I appreciate your comments.
Other comments or questions? I will just add emphasis on Anna's point. I thought this was a really important clarification on the school vouchers. And that is that, the $300,000 that's going out for school voucher costs doesn't directly limit our taxing ability, but it really does directly hit our taxpayers. And so when we as a board are considering what kind of an impact we feel is reasonable to make to our taxpayers, we are at a disadvantage because we're already getting hit with that 300,000. And you can see by these graphs that the trajectory is not in our favor on that line item. So,
And again, that last 25, 26 estimate doesn't actually have the number of FTE in it. If it grows, that bar graph will go up kind of exponentially as it has in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really appreciate the rate increase chart as well, because
Right. That's what's driving the small increase there between 24-25 and 25-26 is just the rate increase, the orange, yellow, and other orange bars there. So, yes.
Okay, so with that, I would entertain a motion. All right, we have a motion from Nathan to approve the 25-26 preliminary budget as presented in our board packets. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Bush. Any further discussion? All right, Katie.
Mr. Hensel? Yes. Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. We have a preliminary budget. And I will just add one thing as a reminder to the viewers. As Andy presented, this is a process that starts way back in March that we go through every year, and we are nearing the end. So, all right, next up, we will move to discussion items, committee reports. We'll start with vision steering. That's Anna.
Thank you. We do have a meeting scheduled for Monday, September 22nd at 5:15, which is before the annual meeting. So do we have a room for that? Is that going to be here? In the conference room. So.
Is that calendared? I mean, yeah, I know it's confirmed, but I don't, has that been sent out as a calendar invite?
Yes, you should have gotten that today, I think. No? I saw it come through.
If you're not on, yes, it went out last week.
Yeah, okay.
All right, policy committee. Mary's not here. Leslie or Dr. Bush, might you have an update?
Yes, we are scheduled to have our next meeting on the 29th, which I think is also a Monday. It's also going to be in the conference room, but is it 5:30 or is that what we did, 5:30? 5:30.
5:30 on the 29th.
Yep.
All right. All right, now, informational items. Dr. Bergstrom, take it away.
Thank you. We're just going to do a quick opening of school update before we move into some of the other issues. And you can see from the pictures that are coming onto the screen here, our team kicked off the 25-26 school year with a whole week of preparations that were taking place at each of the school buildings, and then culminated in an special all-staff assembly. So we heard from students, we heard from an alumni, and we heard from a grandmother of one of our recent graduates, as well as information from myself and Dr. Anderson and Dr. Tanner. So throughout the event, we heard, as you can see, from the OHS band, the cheer team was there, and it was really nice to acknowledge all the new staff members. We asked all of them to stand so we could cheer for them. And then we added, at the very end, we asked all staff who are alumni to come out to the floor to work, to be a part of the cheer with the cheerleaders. And it's always amazing when you see how many people who are spending their professional life here also spent a good part of their childhood here. And so seeing all the people who want to come back and be a part of it, it's always something that's special for everybody. And it really was a good first week last week. Everything was buzzing. Just look how full the bike racks are. So many kids are driving or riding their bike to school, and that's really exciting. And we're thankful for all the adults who make this happen. Our families, anybody who has a child knows what it's like to get them ready for the first week of school. Our educators, our bus drivers, our crossing guards. It truly takes a village, and we sure have a great one. And you'll also notice the bottom middle picture. It is one of the beautiful planters outside of RCI that is taken care of by the PTO. And it's just, boy, did it spruce up RCI when they did it a couple of weeks before school started. It just looked fantastic. And so our first week, of course, is about welcoming our new students and reconnecting with our returning, establishing routines and norms, and building our school communities. So there's a lot of smiles to go around, and we'll be sharing more in the district highlights. But for now, we'll move on to the vision and strategic planning section. So today we are going to be spending quite a bit of time in the output, or so let's say the next step after the board sets their annual priorities. We set our annual goals. And you will hear tonight from the Department of Teaching and Learning, as well as our communication department, regarding the goals that they set last year, the outcomes of those goals. And they will be the first to kick off a series of presentations that will take us really all through first semester. Well, you'll hear first from the DO and then from each individual school. And everything that we say, you should be able to make a connection back to the school board's strategic priorities, because we know that other than some wordsmithing to provide further clarity, these priorities have remained constant over the last few years, as really have our goals. However, we're consistently looking at data and seeing where we need to make changes in order to make sure the goals that we have are relevant to the students and the community in the current fiscal situation. So you'll hear from all of the departments on that particular issue. You actually heard quite a bit from the business department on fiscal sustainability in this particular evening. Then, for our learning readiness framework, we have some really exciting things. For instance, when school started, it was the implementation, also started the implementation of our new cell phone policy. And really happy to report that at the high school, there hasn't been a single cell phone related, I'd say, compliance issue that has gone to the administration. So things are working well in the classroom, and I think in the middle school there have only been 2. So this a really good start to our cell phone policy implementation, and we will of course in October be surveying our students and our staff to get you more specific data to look at. But I wanted you to know that through the 2 numbers that I shared, and through a high school staff meeting that Gina and I attended today, when people were talking about the positives for the first week of school, one table shared the cell phone policy and then collectively cheered. So we'll see if that shows up in our survey next month. But right now, it looks like we're able to do some really positive things thanks to the board's leadership on this. And then, of course, we're continuing our work with professional learning communities. And within the next month, you'll definitely be getting something at home talking about reservations for Monday late start childcare. So now I'm going to ask our teaching and learning department and our special education department to come on up, because they've prepared for you a really high level look at our systemic impact on our students. And you'll certainly get into more detail when we hear from each of the schools over the course of the next couple months.
It looks like it's working tonight, so great. There we go. Okay. Got to really get up to this thing. Note that. All right. Oh, we even get the clicker. Awesome. So, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about the updates. Tonight is going to be mostly, and like Dr. Bergstrom said, an overview of the progress we made toward the goals that we shared with you a year ago. We'll give you some reminders about what those were, so you don't have to remember back a year ago. And then a brief introduction to what our goals are for this upcoming year. So to start with, we want to acknowledge that the goals here were really focused on the increased academic achievement one for that 23 to 25 kind of biennium there that we had with our academic goals. And so a little bit of background from the past 2 years that we've been working on this is that we've been engaged in a process called SAIL, which is by the professional organization AWSA. You've heard us talk about it before. And the purpose of SAIL was to really support a student achievement goal. We came up with this, that every student will demonstrate proficiency of grade level literacy standards. We identified this as a strategic part of providing success for every student so that they can accomplish the portrait of a graduate. And we've been making steps through the last 2 years using 100-day improvement cycles to iteratively look at our data during the year, implement some really focused strategic strategies, like practices during the year, and then get better at them as we go. And so you'll see in here, some of it is the demonstration of better parameters and better descriptions of what we're doing as we try things and get better over time. So this is from last year. So the SAIL goals that we shared about a year ago, the first one, increasing student learning. goal 1 is that we'll increase the percentage of students that demonstrate proficiency in state level standards in reading by at least 5% each year for the next 3 years. So that's our overall goal for all students. Student learning goal number 2 is that the number of students from underserved groups who are proficient in reading will increase by 7%. So interesting thing to notice is that we're going to share the results of those goals, but we first want to explain some of the implications of a decision that we made in the summer of 2024 to raise our standards of reading proficiency. We really raised the bar. And last year, I know we shared with you some complications that were happening in the data world. And so we're going to kind of remind you of one of them. That is that we raised our standard for proficiency. So we changed from something we had been using for a number of years. It was called the intervention risk level. So it was basically one of the indicators on a STAR reading assessment that says, ooh, this student is at risk of needing intervention, meaning they're fairly low and to the point where we probably would say they need something more than our tier 1, meaning universal classroom instruction. Like they actually need the help of an instructional specialist in a small group, or they just need, like, tier 2 can also refer to the classroom teacher doing some small group work to try to identify some misunderstandings and provide some more foundational skills to bring them up into sort of the main part. Now, the reason, so that's what intervention risk level is, because I know that's just a jumble of words. I was told, make sure you explain that. And we decided instead, since we're talking about proficiency, we're actually going to talk about state proficiency benchmarks. So we said we're going to change the bar that we're using. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One is because we were using the word proficiency, but it really wasn't what we were measuring. We were measuring intervention risk level. So we wanted to be more accurate with what we were actually talking about. And that also correlates well with the state forward exam assessment because they talk about being proficient at reading. And so there was sort of a big gap sometimes because we would say, oh my gosh, we're so proficient and yet our forward exam scores aren't nearly as high. Well, that's because we were measuring something kind of different. So what we decided is that we were going to start using that different measurement of state proficiency benchmark. And an important thing to keep in mind is when you look at the graphic on the right side of the slide, you have a continuum of students. And at the far left are the students at the lower levels of proficiency. So they're at risk. As you move to the right, you get all the way up to the people who are proficient, but in the middle, there's a gap. There's some students who are like right in the middle, sort of that 50th percentile, and areas on both sides who aren't at risk, but they also aren't proficient. So that's going to be important as we move forward and talk about where students are categorized. So that's one of the big changes that we made. There's a really important implication for this change. And I want to preview this now for you because when you look at and we knew this was going to happen and we kind of told you this a year ago, is when you raise the bar, there's a whole lot more students who look like they're under the bar and they're not making it. So we want to preview that with you so you don't look at the school data reports that you're going to get soon and say, oh my gosh, what the heck happened? It's that we raised the bar. That's what happened. So I'm going to show you an example here of what it looks like going from the at-risk level bar to a proficiency bar. So you need to keep this in mind when you're comparing the 23-24 and the 24-25 results. So this is an example, and these are two pie charts of the same students. So on the left side, this is using our old benchmark, and you'll notice in the green box directly above the pie chart, it has different words. It says at above benchmark or at risk. That's the at risk. And I wish it didn't say benchmark, but I'm using the same terms we were using before. So in that case, we had about a fifth of the students who were at risk of intervention, which is actually kind of what we would expect. There's something to be said for that bottom quartile that's sort of there in the at risk of needing intervention. And we had about 80% or 4/5 that were at or above that risk level. Well, on the other side, on the right side, we now have the same group of students, but we're applying our higher standard benchmark of actual reading proficiency. So you'll see, obviously, that it looks like a whole lot fewer students are proficient, but we're actually using proficiency benchmarks. So this doesn't mean that the instruction suffered or that a bunch of students it's the same students. It just, we applied a different level of benchmark. So just wanted to preview that for you. So when you look, you can expect that. Otherwise, it can be a little bit shocking. Yes. Go ahead.
More of a casual chat than a microphone moment there, apologies. So when we look at these numbers and the change in this, and I love the fact that we're raising the bar and being able to look at the data, so thank you for all the insightful information on that. Maybe more from a parent perspective, right? You get your report card, looks great, then you maybe get your test results some weeks later, months later. Are these numbers internal district numbers that the district uses to measure its own progress, or do these end up on like some of the progress reports that get mailed home? There's kind of a change management aspect of what families should start to be prepared for interpreting on this if they once were and now no longer are, and what that really means that we're raising the bar, as you said, and that may not come through in a letter. Any thoughts on that, or am I in a totally different direction?
No, you're in a good direction. There's an aspect of that is we're going to talk about a little bit later when we get to Act 20. And the reason for that is because K through 3, Act 20 requires that we use a completely different assessment. And this is the first year we were required to do that. It's called Ames Web Plus. And so obviously that's something different that makes it even more complicated. But we are sending notifications to parents. In fact, I believe we did this last week to parents grades K through 3 to explain to them what the Ames Web Assessment is, and that's going to be administered again this year, and the results from that are going to look different. So we do have sort of a communication plan about that. The important point, that doesn't completely answer your question though, because the higher grades still are going to see that adjustment. So the data that you're seeing here is internal because it is STAR assessments that we are using. Now it's nationally normed. So it's a validated assessment across the entire nation. So it's less susceptible to like individual. It's different than grades. Like a teacher, there can be some variations between teachers on grades depending on the measure. But we are going to need to do some communication to people about what their STAR. Well, no, actually, because they get their STAR results. This is basically the aggregate that we're seeing. So a parent getting the results home is going to get the same STAR parent report home that they've gotten every year, and that's not going to look any different to them. It's just that when we look at the system impact, we're going to see different numbers for students. What probably will happen, though, is the numbers that parents are seeing are from the school level are actually going to look a little bit more consistent with what their student has been seeing on their STAR reports. Now, they probably don't know what the system level is, but their student isn't going to show a drop off because we're just reporting a different benchmark, but their STAR, like detail reports on the individual student, is going to stay the same from year to year. So that shouldn't be a huge, looking at your student, it shouldn't look very different.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So on this slide in particular, I totally understand and also appreciate the raising the bar. On the left graph, really that isn't school-wide reading proficiency. That's the intervention risk level, right? We're just calling it school-wide reading proficiency.
It was what we did in the past called proficiency, yes.
Right, but it is the intervention risk level. So
yes.
19 and a half. Okay, so now we have more kids that are not proficient, right, because of all that we've talked about. So what happens with this 46.2% of the kids, which because we've raised the bar, we do have more students that are not proficient. How are they going to be supported, or with the intervention or specialists, or how are you all as managing that there are more people that are in the red, so to speak?
Well, our goal has always been to move everybody up, and so we're continuing to do that. And some of the things that we've done, like we preceded the state in adopting a systemic phonics-based curriculum or science of reading-based curriculum. And so that's something that we're in our third year of implementation with. And so those are some of the things that we've done because we noticed this quite a while ago. And so we're not necessarily doing anything differently with those group of students, because they're still the same students that we're moving wherever they are on that continuum. We're moving them up. We're pretty confident that we're going to be able to continue using those same strategies with the professional learning that's been done with all the teachers to increase their skills. And then also the curriculum that we're using to work with the students to increase their reading levels across the board. Two things that I'll say that we're doing that are coming up this year, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but one is having PLCs have some dedicated time in order to be able to analyze the student work. There are a lot of students who, when we analyze their work, if they're part of like a group that's traditionally underserved, we might not be meeting their needs as well. And so we really want to focus on that, because that's going to do two things. It's going to provide those students with access to the curriculum and the differentiated teaching of the teacher. And at the same time, by making changes for them, some of those students, it's going to actually make it more accessible to the entire class. And so as we're able to get the input and the really analyzing our instruction and changing it to make it more accessible to like students sort of on the margins, it makes it more accessible to everybody. And so that's one of the strategies that we're having for increasing that. You might have heard it called things like UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and things like that. So that's our, we're not doing a brand new strategy. It's kind of the same one that we're going to see continuing on.
And then my follow-up question, so on this number, this 46.2, that's from last year, right?
Right.
Not proficient. And if the goal is a 5%, so what are you expecting this number to be for next year then, if we're hitting our goal?
Our goal for this whole thing would be that like 53.8%, and I can't see if that's we'll say the blue part. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be like 58.8% would be proficient. Like each year we'd make 5% growth in what was proficient.
Right.
53.8 to 58.8, that would be 5%.
53 to 58.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna let the math go. Okay, and so this is gonna sound, we're a far distance away from having a solid percentage of our kids be in the proficient category.
Yeah, we're at like 60% or 50, 55, 60, or 80%, depending on which measure you're using, which is on the next slide if you want to see. Yeah. Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, so I need a clarification. The 46.2, the non-proficient, is that the same group that you're calling underserved?
No, this is an example from just one school. So this is of all students.
Okay, so tell me, what group is it you're looking at? Like, what do you consider underserved?
Well, good point. This will let us skip some time later. One of the students one of the things we did this summer, we did our sale process transferred into something called Elevate. And you'll notice that in a previous slide, when we just said underserved students, but we let each school determine what their underserved student population was, depending on their school population and their data, because there's different classifications and demographics in each school. What we did this summer is we said, well, we actually want to be able to use the same language and be able to be specific comparing across schools. And so we identified 4 groups of students that our data shows we have traditionally underserved. Those are students who are Black, students who are Hispanic, students who access IEPs, and students who are multilingual learners with an access score of less than 6. 6 means you're proficient in English. So if you're less than that, basically we've identified that the data says that we have not served those groups well. So moving forward, from this year on, we have a much more specific student learning goal, number 2, which is those students who are not proficient and are in one of those groups are kind of the group that we're focusing on.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and I really like that all the schools will be united in what specifically they're looking at. Now, this isn't my next portion of this question. You may just not have gotten to this yet, or it might be just not your purview to do this. It's a social or a school culture question. What are we doing to relieve stress from these underserved populations? Because all these underserved populations are typically students that have higher stress levels due to multiple reasons. I'm not going to go into all of them. What are we doing to relieve that stress so that they have the capability to be there and function and actually learn more, because most of them are all very fully capable of learning more. It's a matter of reducing that stress level and helping them. So what are we doing as a culture to change that?
Well, one of the big things that we're doing with our Elevate emphasis this year is we're trying to elevate a few things, and one of those is the sense of belonging. And so we, here, there we go. So we're focusing on elevating some things, and one of them is belonging, and the other one is inclusion. Does anybody have the question, why do those lines diverge? If you do, I'll go to the next slide. If you don't, I'll skip it. It's choose your own adventure. All right, thumbs up if you want to do it, thumbs down if you want to skip it. Okay. One line goes up and not the other because it shows that interventions that we're doing are moving the students up out of the risk categories, which is awesome because, you know, it shows that we're shrinking the students who actually are at risk and actually need intervention. And so that's awesome because those are our underserved groups. And so that's a huge cause for, I'm glad you did a thumbs up because, well, because I'm trying to be sensitive to, I'm trying to read the room, and I know it's late because the 15-minute budget presentation went a little longer. So anyway, so it's really cool. So our interventionists have done a great job, which is awesome for them because they are really working hard. And so we've done a really great job of moving students from that intervention up to the average. It's just that they haven't got up to the proficient level yet. So it shows the importance of what we're doing about focusing on the individual student needs. It also, I mean, we've seen the results of that. It also shows the importance of the second strategy, which is like using our PLCs to analyze our instruction and make changes to the tier 1 instruction, because once the students are out of intervention and they're in the general classroom, that's when that tier 1 instruction is really instrumental in moving them up toward proficient. So there you go. That was, all right. Now, the second goal that we had, it talked about the number of students from underserved groups who are proficient in reading will increase by 7%. Like I said before, each school identified their own underserved group. So this coming year, we're going to have it really tightly defined. But for now, we just wanted to give you some insights into what some of these groups looked like. And so we're going to go through a few that we kind of have the area for. So I'm going to pass it off to Candace to talk about what's been happening for the past few years with students who access IEPs.
Switch it for them.
Oh, yeah.
So I think this slide actually gets into some of the things that you were trying to ask questions about before. So our students with IEPs over the last 5 years, our data certainly shows that we have room for improvement, right, in terms of getting to a proficiency level. But you can see that we are moving in that direction. Our below basic and basic categories are decreasing over time, and our proficient and advanced are increasing over time. Clearly a lot of room for improvement, but we have been making some growth there. So one of the things that we know is that we have to have our kids more in the general curriculum, and that piece will be supported by what John said in terms of that analyzing student data and the time in PLCs. You heard us last year say our special educators, our interventionists can't get to the PLCs because they're dealing with the student crisis, or they're doing their specially designed instruction during those times. So we do anticipate that we will be able to see more growth through the PLC work and through just promoting inclusive strategies for making sure that our kids are having access to the general curriculum more frequently and more solidly. We also know that we are increasing our numbers in special ed, so our numbers of students with IEPs have increased over time. And I would agree with all of you who said, even though it's a lot of money, it's well worth the money. These are some great kids.
Thank you. The next one we want to look at is multilingual learners. And, okay, real quick, everybody, you have to guess how many languages are spoken in the district, Caleb. Other than English. Oh, you got it on the first try. That's awesome. I was going to have everybody go and see who's closest, but he got it. So good job. 14 languages other than English are spoken in the district. Nice. Did you look at my notes?
And nobody stumped Andy on a budget question. So
yeah,
so we had to add a little bit of gamesmanship there.
What is the defeasement rate? No. So you could have. Okay, so quiz show, that one went really better than I thought. Okay, this would be harder. I'm not going to ask, but how many students we had in 24-25 who were multilingual learners in the district? I'll give you the answer. It's 127. So 127 speaking 14 different languages. And that's grown quite a bit over the past few years. But here's an interesting thing. We noticed about 2 or 3 years ago that students who are multilingual learners take a thing called the Access Test, and it's specific to them. It's taken every year in like December, January into February timeframe. And Access is a really cool test because it takes the students where they're at and it projects a timeline for when in the future, based on their age and their language level, when they are expected to reach English proficiency. Which is really cool because then you're not just like hoping and you're like, well, I hope they get English proficient. It actually has an expected timeline. What we noticed a few years ago is that our students were making some growth and then they were plateauing. So we saw this stagnation of growth toward English proficiency and we're like, we got to look at that. So we actually started working with CISA 2 to analyze our instructional program to look at what it looked like. We looked at a ton of different data, a ton of different things, and a lot of different models that I won't go into right now, but we identified some specific strategies to improve and how to focus more clearly on providing our multilingual students with the instruction they need to become English proficient. And as you can see, it worked. You can't see yet because I haven't told you what the graph means, but the green line is us, and that's good. So this is the percent of students who are on track to reach proficiency within their expected timeline. The yellow line is the state. So we have done a great job in the past 2 years, our multilingual teachers, to focus our instruction really deliberately with specific practices and change our instructional model, which has not been easy. But over the past 2 years, we've seen an incredible increase in the percentage of students who are on track to English proficiency, which is really good news. So that's a yay. I get to the next one, which is not such a yay. But this is another underserved group, students who are Hispanic, reading proficiency. It's also remained stagnant. There's some variations here, and we do not, for your info, there were 379 Hispanic students in OSD last year. So most of them not multilingual learners, obviously, if you do the numbers. But reading proficiency is really an area that we want to improve on, and this data clearly shows that it's an underserved group that we would like to focus on. And so that's why it's one of our Elevate goals, is because as we want to elevate learning, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the students who aren't proficient, who are in one of these underserved groups. So that's something that we are diving into. That's why we're spending some time this year focusing on it. Yes?
Real quick on the last slide, the multilingual learners, when you say proficient, this is reading,
Yes.
writing proficient,
It's English proficiency. It's both reading, writing,
and verbal?
Yes, reading, writing, and speaking.
Speaking, thank you. Okay, great.
Thank you. Good question. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Darcy to talk about Act 20 for grades K-3.
Okay, so the first, I want to point out a couple of distinguishing differences on this slide than the slides that you saw before. First of all, this shows, well, the other slides showed multiple years. This shows 1 year, just it's the data point from last spring. And also the key is different because the key that we use is the key that Ames Web Plus uses. So when you're looking at the colors, they don't all mean the things that they meant before. I also want to draw your attention to the yellow box because when I was thinking about this slide, I wanted, if there was one key takeaway that I wanted everyone to understand when they saw this slide is that, first of all, and I'll explain this, but similar to other districts across the state, we are really eager in Oregon to see what the effects of the renorming process has and how well it aligns our work to the proficiency of our students in K-3. So what you might remember is a couple of weeks ago, we sent, in the board update, we sent some information on the renorming process that Ames Web Plus went through. It's important to know that the process was not connected in any way to Act 20 or it was not specific to Wisconsin. It was just part of Pearson's normal cycle of recalibrating the assessment using cohorts of students in a national sample that were relatable. So it just happened, lucky for us, that the timing of the update aligned with the first year of implementation for Wisconsin's Act 20. Now, as a part of Act 20, all schools are required to administer a reading screener to all students. This is a law, so there's no opt-out. So the numbers that you're seeing are all of our students. The screener helps to identify students who are on track, those who may need some additional support, and those who require a personal reading plan, which we call a PRP. And they require a personal reading plan if they fall below the 25th percentile during any testing period. On this slide, the students in the orange and the red are students that were required to have personal reading plans. I want to note something, that these trends, because Kim White and I are reading specialists, were contacting other districts throughout the course of the testing periods, and these trends were not specific only to Oregon. Many of the other districts in the state, all of the other districts that we connected with, were having these same sort of trends in the data. Additionally, during the 24-25 school year, we started out just using what the state was recommending for us as measures to determine a student's reading profile. So for kindergarten, it was a composite of 2 assessments, the letter naming and the letter word sound fluency. In grades 1 through 3, it was 1 assessment, the oral reading fluency. Those are the results that you see on this slide. Now, throughout the course of the year, Kim worked with administration and our interventionists to kind of guide our thinking and deepen our use of the assessment data. So together, this team of people, we added additional composite measures that we're going to be taking a look at this year that will give us a more complete picture of our readers. The measures will guide our literacy goals moving forward, and while we will continue to report the state required measures, our internal measures will be used to help instructional planning, and it'll also allow us to tailor our instruction more precisely to support the students who need help, even if they're not identified at the state's minimum requirements for needing additional help. So I'm also going to give a shout out to our interventionists like John did. So when we had these initial results, it was kind of a surprise, and the number of students identified was significantly higher than we anticipated it being. It created an enormous amount of work for our teams, especially our intervention teams, who rose to the challenge with remarkable skill and dedication. They came together quickly. They adjusted schedules, they coordinated across grade levels to ensure that every student received the support they needed. The care, creativity, and responsiveness they demonstrated in planning for students is something that we are all deeply proud of. It was, quite simply, an extraordinary example of teamwork and service of our children. This year, the renormed data should now provide a more accurate and aligned reflection of student performance. We anticipate that many of the students flagged last year will not require the same level of intervention this year, but we don't want to count only on that. So over the summer, we worked together as a K-2 team to refine our instructional approach by making shifts within the universal, specifically our skills block instruction. We adopted the most recent skills block instruction that all of our specialists believe is more aligned to the systematic delivery of phonics. This will strengthen our core literacy instruction, and it allows us to provide targeted support to our students within the universal classroom setting.
Sorry. What month or about what time is the screener given to these kids?
It's happening right now.
So for kindergartners who just...
I'm sorry, it's 3 times a year.
Oh,
I
okay,
apologize.
thank you.
So it's right now, it's in December, and then it'll be again in the spring.
So when you look at kindergartners that are happening now, if we identify kids that are in the red or the orange, they're getting interventions even though they just started school for the first time?
They will be getting a personalized reading plan, which is a plan that is, the teachers will set goals with the help of the interventionists. Sometimes it'll be a pull-out intervention situation, and sometimes it won't. It could be the small group instruction is directly targeted to the students' strength, or in this case, deficiency, where we need to build up.
Okay, I only asked that because I know like kindergarten, there's like a huge jump in reading proficiency from the start of the year to the end of the year.
Which was really the purpose of the renorming process. What we were noticing is that the numbers, the percentile numbers, because this is all a norm, it's normed based on the cohort of, or on the comparison to their peers, is the numbers were really, really out of line with what students were able to do. So Pearson, the renorming has brought a lot of those numbers to a realistic place where, and they change throughout the year too. So in the fall, the numbers are much lower than they'll expect them to be in the spring.
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. And then I just have a question. I know you said that these are their colors and setup, but how is high average lower than average, or is that just weird? John's laughing. I'm just wondering about how that works.
I see what you're saying.
I was confused.
Yeah, understood.
It's them, right?
This
is not you guys.
These are the numbers that we got off of. Yeah. It might be it is a typo. Yellow should be below green where we put it in, because we found that one last. That light green should be above his high average.
Okay. All right, good.
And if you look at the graph, my mistake, we can fix it. But if you look at the graphs, you can see that green is above.
I just want to make sure I understood.
No, I appreciate the question.
No, thank you very much.
I'm going to change it right now. There, if Katie refreshes, it'll look right. Let's see the magic of technology right here. Yeah. Oh, I kind of did. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Thank you. You're more observant than we were after looking at rainbow graphs for hours. All right. Excellent. Okay. Last data slide, we wanted to look at math here. So math, this is STAR Math grades 1 through 8. And the thing that you'll see when it comes up off of a black screen is that we have a lot of students who are in the proficient, like most of our students are in the proficient, but it's also some stagnant growth. And so this is something that we also want to look at. And this is something that we actually noticed last year. And so we've already put into place our strategies to improve the growth rate for this. Some of the strategies are we're offering professional development in the form of, we're calling it a Bridges Reboot. Bridges is the math curriculum for K-5. So we're doing a Bridges Reboot, and already this summer we had 50 teachers who came in during the summer to do training, and we brought in Bridges trainers to actually do the high quality training that they have. So we've got 50 teachers who already do that, and we're offering that throughout the year to refresh everybody's skill. We got great results too, because we had teachers who were like, "Can we do this every year?" Like, well, yeah, that'd be great. We'll see what we can do. Because it had been a few years since the initial training. Other things we're doing, we have, and the reboot is more than just training. It's actually like a recommitment to the core practices of the curriculum, like having students engage in Number Corner every day, like that. I don't know if you're familiar with Number Corner, but anyway, it's like sometimes with the schedule and everything, it kind of gets a little bit like shuffled around. We're like, no, that's really important. And it's also helping teachers understand the why behind it, because sometimes it doesn't always make sense. Like this Number Corner, it's talking about things they haven't seen in the lesson yet. Like, yep, that's by design. And so talking with these Bridges experts has been really helpful to explain the why behind things. Like, how was this designed to do this, and what's the learning theory behind it? So it's really great training, and I think that'll really help, because understanding the why behind something is really important for the delivery. We're also doing Bridges binder training throughout the year. we got like 26 teachers who are signed up to do that. And also props to the K5 or K6, whatever, K5 principals. For our October 30 Professional Development Day, or Professional Learning Day, they've actually sort of given up their school time so that we can do, because we need to do professional learning in a lot of different areas. And so we're bringing in a math consultant from Math Institute of Wisconsin to train everyone, K5, including the special ed teachers, which, if you've been listening, is really important, because we need them to understand the why behind the curriculum as well. So we're really buckling down on the professional learning and the going back to the binders, which have all the resources and everything, and really having people understand the rationale behind it, so that we can have a much stronger and more coherent delivery of the curriculum as it's designed. So that's our strategy for this, because we know that we don't want to remain stagnant here. All right. We already talked a little bit about this, transitioning from SAIL to Elevate. The administrative team completed its 2 years of cycle with SAIL, and so we decided to call it something different this year because it's coming in-house. So Elevate, the tagline is elevating learning through purposeful practice, and as it's gone on, we decided we're going to add more than just learning. We're elevating belonging and collaboration and inclusion as well. So we had a team that every school brought a team in June, and they all developed their own school plans to meet the district goals using these 100-day improvement cycles. And we have sort of it's called like a tight loose framework for this. And so schools can make their own plans, but within the parameters we have. A couple of the things that we're saying are tight, like it has to have a focus on instructional clarity, learning targets, success indicators, and feedback mechanisms. That's something we've been doing for 2 years. We're going to continue to do it until we get it just becoming a habitual practice that's 90% at least implemented, because we see the student changes after doing that. Because student success is kind of a lagging indicator after you have the practices in place. We're also focusing on creating highly effective PLCs to really analyze student work and change our Tier 1 instruction. You've hopefully heard the same things repeated multiple times tonight, because it's really where we're at. So that Tier 1 instruction based on looking at student work, who did well, who didn't, what themes do we see that we can improve our practice on is important. And so that analyzing work is going to be huge. So within those sort of tight parameters, schools develop their own plans, and we're going to be reanalyzing those on 100-day improvement cycles. We also refined our goals, so we kind of switched them too. Oh, thanks, I forget that. So our student learning goal number 1, we added some specificity to this, which is by May 30th, 2026, the number of students who are proficient in reading will increase by 7% for students whose ethnicity is Black or Hispanic, students served by IEPs, and multilingual students with access scores less than 6 as measured by the STAR Reading Assessment. And then student goal learning 2 is we'll increase the percentage of students demonstrating proficiency of state level reading standards in reading by at least 5% each year in 25-26 and 26-27. Really, we have kind of 3-year goals on this too, but we're being specific and revising it year by year here just to get more granular. So we've moved the goal for the underserved groups to the forefront to emphasize that we need to focus on their needs, and we're trying to part of our PLC process before was at the very end, it was, okay, who benefited and who didn't. We're moving that higher in the priority list because we want to make sure that that's not getting left off the table at the end. And the added time for the late start is going to be huge for that. It's going to really allow us to spend the time we need to analyze that. And so also specifically defining the groups and having that consistent across schools should be great, because we can much more easily collaborate across schools and say what's working for you, almost like a big mega PLC between schools. So every school can still have additional goals also, and they're going to be sharing those with you in the future when you hear the school-specific goal reports. And our district-wide goal is still a 5% increase in the percentage of students who are proficient. And these apply K-11. We actually are choosing some new proficiency definitions that will define how growth is delineated, and that's because of like Act 20, and we have some for the high school as well. So those are the Elevate goals, and it's really just the cycle. And so these are the 2 key strategies, which we've already talked about, and just doing that plan, do, study, act cycle multiple times throughout the year, where we get to find out what worked, what didn't, make better plans, and do it better. And I'm out to the question slide.
Yep. So thanks. I know you threw out some stats before, and clearly math is not my strong point tonight, so I'm not going to try to add them. But for goal 1, how many students is that are in those 4 categories? And potentially, I know some might be in 2 categories, right? But how many singular individual students are we talking about for goal 1?
It's a good question. My guess would be, let me do some quick math in my head. Okay. All right, so student with IEPs, it's 12 to 18%. So if you say 15, we're talking about like maybe like what? I don't know, 400, 600. Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
we
it
can do
doesn't
that.
need to,
But
if you don't know off the top of your head, totally fair. I would like to know just because
Yeah.
it's curious. I'm curious about, is that 1,000 kids? Is it 2,000 kids? Is it 400 kids? Right?
closer to 400 than 1,000.
Okay, great, thanks.
That's
But
my good instinct.
10% of our
Yeah.
student population.
We'll get back to you because my gut
Yeah.
instinct might be wrong. But
Okay.
I think we were at 550 or so kids last year in special education. So that category alone is going to be a pretty significant number. And then we've got our Hispanic students who some fall into that category as well. And so, yeah, we can definitely look at that a little more carefully for you, and the buildings can provide it as well.
What other questions, Caleb? Go ahead.
So it's getting close to 9 o'clock, so I don't want to ask like a big question but I do have a big question kind of that I think the goals are, I have no issue with ambitious goals. I think the goals are ambitious, especially the way that it seems that you're going to measure them with a 5% of all, like the number going up by 5%, because there's a difference between, and I was looking at the last slide and I was thinking about how you could read those differently. So if you move 7% of the students who are not proficient into proficient, that's a different number than 7% of all students in that group, right? And so that's one of my concerns but that's the bigger question that I'm worried about, is like operationalizing and measuring growth and progress. But I'll set that aside for now, and just something that I'm thinking about, and we can maybe talk about it another time because it's getting late. Or you can try to talk me through it right now or walk me through it right now really quickly. The question that I wanted to ask, and this is something I think is easier to ask and answer in a brief amount of time so we're not here too late. One of the things we've talked about in the past is the challenge of using like school-based data from one year to the next, because it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, because you get different students from one year to the next. And so my concern is that the same thing's going to happen at a district-wide level, and it could be we could just by happenstance get a group of students who move into the district who are incredible readers, right? And their scores are off the charts, and they help us raise our proficiency levels by a significant margin. Or the opposite could happen, right? We could have a bunch of students move into the district. Maybe it's because we're a destination district for students who are struggling in school and their parents want to help them out, which would be great because that says something about the strength of our district. And also, too, if we have students who are moving in because they hear we're great for students who are doing well in school. So I guess my question is, how are we going to be able to know, and how will we know if we're talking about the same students and their skills progressing from year to year, and it's not necessary? I mean, I don't know if we will know that, I guess, but I'm asking that question, is how will we be able to measure that? Will we be able to measure that?
Two ways that we can help with that. One, which we already do, is we only included in the STAR data that we used for this. We only included students who were there for the full academic year. That's a point that you can do. So if you have a bunch of students who either move in or move out, those are excluded. So you're only seeing the students who were there for the entire year, which reduces that on a 1-year basis. The other thing, though, that we can do is we can do it by cohort instead of by year. So that's something that we can actually, in NextPath, actually, that is the way I did it for like the for some of those data that we pulled from NextPath with the colorful bars, I actually did that to show the cohort that is in the building this year. It's showing where they were prior years. And so we just need to make sure that we do that. So we're measuring the cohort percentile as it moves through the system, instead of saying like this year's third graders, this year's fourth graders, this, like that. Where that becomes difficult is when you don't have the same measure over multiple years. So for example, if you have ACT scores or something like that, you have a different group who's taking the ACT every year, and it's very hard. We've tried to figure out ways to account for other variables, it's really difficult. But what we can do for most of the data, at least K-8, if we're using the same assessment multiple years, is we can use cohort data to move through and look at that. And we might want to do it differently, but it'll help to pull out some of those variables that you mentioned.
Okay, board members, we have another agenda item we have to get to, so I propose if you have further questions, let's ask them now, and then we can invite the team to come back at a future meeting to answer the questions. Go ahead.
So the first part of my question about the goals, I guess I would like to have more discussion about that in the future, is just in terms of how we're going to measure that. Is it an additive 5%, and then in 2 years we're going to have 10% more students, and then in 3 years is it 15%, or is it going to be is it a different measure, or can we operationalize it and have that explained? Because I'm concerned about the goal, and not that I'm not concerned about the goal. The goal's great, but I am concerned about like the long-term achievability of the goal, just because over time, right? It's a challenging number to meet. Not that I have a problem with that, right? It's great, but I would like to have more discussion about that perhaps in the future.
Okay, noted. Other questions for future? All right. Thank you, team.
Thank you very
Good
much
work.
for your attention and good questions.
All right, next up we have a communication goals update. So Erica will join us. And then we are going to skip federal and state legislative update tonight, and we will skip superintendent's report, but we will come back and hear both of those items in 2 weeks. So, welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, so I am here. Is this working? Feels like it's not working. I don't like that. It feels weird. Just pick it up. Oh, all right. Okay. I feel like a talk show. I feel like a podcast host. Okay. Okay. So we will get on with it since it's 9:00. So I'm here to report on our goal of strengthening family and community partnerships. And as you know, now I have two things to click. I'm just going to look up here. And so we really do this in a variety of ways. So engaging through sharing our story, we have many different channels through which we maintain and communicate and engage with our families and community and students and school community. So real quick, you should all be familiar with these, but we have a district website that has a wealth of information. We have social media presence where we share information about life in our schools and learning activities. We utilize media, news media, the print media. We have the Oregon Observer. We have the Fitchburg Star that circulates within our district. We have news media, TV media as needed. We can do videos. We have direct messaging through Infinite Campus. Community events. The photo up there we've shared with you before is from our National Night Out community events. And of course, we have a district podcast too. And so really, we use all these different mechanisms strategically depending on what we're doing and our goals and objectives and we're trying to communicate. But these are all at our disposal. So I'm going to highlight just a few. So again, remember, this is 23 to 25 goals that we're talking about. And I shared, I think the last time I shared with you, we had just launched our website. So this is a bit of a review, but also some important things have happened since that time. When we implemented our new website, we were focusing on the mobile first design because we know from research that people often, mostly look at our website on their phones. We made a ton of accessibility improvements. We for example, reducing PDFs significantly, making sure that that our color contrast was appropriate and met the standard for the industry, and minimizing clicks to accessing content. Most of the content on our webpage you can get to be 0 to 2 clicks. And I think it's like 99% of it you can get to with 3 clicks. But again, reducing how many times people have to dig in to find the content they're looking for. And then since we visited last time, we have been able to implement our integrated staff directory process. So that is a nightly feed that comes in and does a lot of automatic updating for us. That's really, really helpful and saves quite a bit of time and efficiency. And also, since I shared with you last time, the previous goal report, the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association does awards for different categories, and ours was selected for a website award in last season. And not only that, but we also got the best in category, so that was super exciting. And then we also received a national award from the National Public Relations Association for schools. So we're super proud of our website, and I think it's working quite well for us. Social media is another thing that I'm going to highlight. And I have a few stats here. And there's plans behind all of this, so you can go into this presentation and see all the nitty-gritty details, but I'm going to keep it high level for now. But really, our followers, we look at followers and reach for the main metrics. And our followers increased by about 9.5%. Last time, the overall goal, I do a little consulting with a company who's an expert in school social media, and they say that increasing by 4% is really great. So I was really happy to see that we were at this point. Our average monthly reach was over 43,000. And you want that to be, the standard is you want that to be 3 times the amount of your followers, and we're well above that. Interestingly, though, when we compare to the previous year, the reach was down a little bit. I don't have a great explanation for that, other than there are so many messages that are coming through, and social media just continues to expand and new channels continue to come about. So the more that happens and the more content that's out there, sometimes the less your message is going to be seen. And we are all completely organic. We don't pay to boost posts or anything like that. So when other places are doing that, sometimes their messages go into the algorithm and get into other people's feeds a little bit more. But the interesting thing is the content interactions were up by 20%. So that means that the people who are engaging more. And if you also consider if our followers are 6,600, there's 4,100 kids in our district. There's people who have probably follow our page who aren't necessarily members of our district or in school anymore. So perhaps that content isn't as relevant to them anymore. So that might be an explanation as well. Podcast. This is one of my favorite things. We've just started our 4th season of Inside the OSD. And we promote it in all kinds of different ways. I just have a spattering of things here. We share it on our website, and that's where you can go to get, that's kind of the hub for it. We have little cards that we give out, and I'm going to give you some before we leave tonight. We'll do articles in the Observer sometimes. They've been great about sharing the things that are going on in the podcast. And Dr. Bergstrom and I have also had the fortune of presenting and doing a magazine article at one point for different organizations. We have little stickers we hand out to the guests that come onto our show, and we, of course, launch it on our Facebook page. Now, our overall goal is to have at least 50 downloads and listeners per episode. Most of our episodes have well over that. I have created here the top 10 highly viewed episodes on the podcast, and this is of all time, so of all 4 seasons. The super interesting thing is, well, number one, you can't really beat kindergartners. Okay, they're the favorite. And lunch, those are always the favorite. Those were in our very first season, and you can go through, the Snow Days was super popular. We also had Brian Dukes, so Brian Dukes shared the Snow Day one, and of course we got quite a few views that way. And you can go on and see the other ones, but I mean, it's things with kids. When kids are involved in our podcasts, it's a good thing. The one I'm looking at Nathan over here. The one, the very top 10 last one is our first episode of this season. And Nathan's son was a part of that podcast. And it's interesting that it's on the list because it really isn't a fair comparison because it hasn't been, because these don't go away. They're still on our website. So the best comparison is the first 7 days. But when you look at the total lifetime views, it's in the top 10. And I attribute that to our new football coach shared it with his families, I believe, and the Boosters Club has shared it, and we've been putting it in messaging. So the more we can do that, and that's kind of a takeaway for me, to really focus on after we launch a podcast to make sure that the people know it's there and they're kind of prompting them to share it with their families. So that's pretty exciting. So again, it's been a great channel for us because it allows us to speak in depth about information and great things going on in the district in a conversational way, a convenient way for families, because we target about 20 minutes or less for our episodes because the average commute time from Oregon to where most people go is a little over that, based on the village data metrics from a few years back. And so again, we've strategically put this together to reach people, and different episodes reach different audience members. And even if you only have, I don't even mind if sometimes we have less than 50 on an episode, because even if you have a couple people who get in-depth information about a topic, they can share it with others. So I'm pleased with it. And then the last thing that I'll profile tonight is the Readiness for Learning Engagement Initiative that we had. So one of the things in my role is that I support large initiatives that we have going on in the district with communication. So our goal with this really was to have many engagement opportunities for families, to offer a wide variety and let them share feedback to become aware of what we were doing, so awareness, and then also to have a feedback loop so they could share their thoughts with us. So you can see on the left-hand side, again, we used many different mechanisms and channels for getting the message out, from our website to direct messages and so on. And what I really, you can do all this stuff, right? You can have all these things, but then your question is, well, gosh, is it working? Do people really know? And when we look at the engagement results, this is just a few things, and there's more in the full report, but we had over 2,300 web page views. Now that could be multiple people, but when you look at unique users, it's over 1,000. And I think in our district of 4,100 kids, it's pretty good. We also have comprehensive FAQs on our website, and we can see from our metrics that 1,500 or so were opened and were read. We got 85 feedback forms from our website. We had 75 people attend listening or informational sessions, either in person or online. We had 3 of those. And over 300 was our estimate of people who attended the Screenagers event that was part of the cell phone initiative. So overall, super pleased with how this is going. Moving forward, we've been integrating the information that of the 2 initiatives. We've been integrating that to all the communications we've done for back to school, and we'll continue to do so. But the final little tidbit is we have school perceptions data, and that is our survey that we do in April of each year, our family survey. And these were the results for the communication tactics, so easy to understand, informative, and timely. It's a 3-point scale, robust sample size, and the metrics are looking really good. And while we can't it's not directly related to readiness for learning, we can't tie them one-to-one. It happened very close, and even in the midst of that whole effort, And so I think that people were able to understand what we were saying, they were informed, and they got the information that they needed. So I think that's all I have. Yes, it is. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Erica? Go ahead, Leslie.
It's not really a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for everything you do. You are always so cheerful and bright whenever you interact with anybody for the district, and you are an asset to Oregon School District. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Erica, you do such a great job. The clarity of your messaging and the target, as you've described tonight, I mean, the targeting that you do of the audience, everything is just top notch. And it's really, really important work. It's really important that I think our community and our families have a high expectation from our school district, and the way that you deliver and craft these messages is just spot on. Yeah. So, and it's also really important because, as we've talked about a bit earlier with the budget discussion, it's becoming much more important that, families have choices on where they would choose to live, where they choose to send their kids to school. And this clarity of this communication, the positivity of the communication is really, really important to keep our district where we're at. So thank you for everything that you do every day. All right. With that, I think we're set to proceed. So we will move to our future agenda on the 22nd of September. We have our annual meeting, and then we will have a regular meeting following that, which brings us to checkout. Anything for checkout? Seeing nothing? All right. So the great thing about having really engaged board members is that we just get to spend a lot of time together. So thanks for that tonight. And I will entertain a motion. Motion by Heather to adjourn. Is there a second? Second by Anna. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries 6-0. Have a good evening.